Hi, and welcome to UBC Ecosystem Modeling course, where we today will be looking at two tutorials. So in the course, it is tutorials 11 and 12. So you can find them on the course website under tutorials. Scroll down and somewhere we will find, if scrolling works, we will find 11 maximum sustainable yield and 12 policy certs. So that's the two that we'll be going through today. For this, let's have a look at Ecopath. And we're going to be working on Anchovy Bay, so I'm going to open, basically you can use any version you may have of Anchovy Bay. I'll just open it. And I'm not going to go through all the details of the tutorial, because it's very much arranged, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, but rather talk a bit about it and try a few things and show you what I look for when I'm when working with these two topics. So I'll to some extent follow it, but not completely. The first thing is, I've forgotten already if I have opened it. Yes, I have opened the Anchovy Bay model. While I'm here, because we're going to be looking at maximum sustainable yield, one thing I'm going to check is the off-vessel price, that there actually are numbers in here and not just one. Had these all been ones, you can think of it as optimizing for landings, basically. Everything would have the same values. That would be a fuel security question if there really was like that. But for what we're doing here, like economics comes into the picture, it's important to have values in here, basically. Reasonable values is of course always preferable. So we have that. Well, then the next thing is, let's go to Ecosim. And we're going to load an Ecosim scenario. We don't need the time series for this. So just load an Ecosim scenario, go down there, output, run Ecosim. So I'm in Ecosim, output, run Ecosim. And this is what I always do. First go in and just click run, just to see what we have in the model. So we have basically the default model outline here, where because of biomass accumulation in here, and if I go to input, we can see that there is, for whales there is positive biomass accumulation, and for seals there is a negative biomass accumulation. So the assumption here is that whales are recovering after harvest or culling has stopped, and is still ongoing when we start the model for seals. Because we don't have time series in here, it's going to continue. If the time series had been in here, the seals culling would stop after a few years, but in this model it will continue. So when we go to run Ecosim, we can see that seals are increasing because of that biomass accumulation, and whales are increasing because of the positive biomass accumulation, and seals are decreasing. Seals don't go extinct, and you see the decrease is gradually getting slower and slower. That's because as there are fewer of them, they compete less about the resources, and opposite, whales start increasing pretty rapidly and then they decrease more and more. If for these groups we had a higher vulnerability for whales, they would increase more. And for seals, if we had a lower vulnerability, they would decrease less. They would be closer to it, there would be more compensation. If we made seals higher vulnerability, we would have said they're really far from carrying capacity, and they would be decreasing even more. That's how it works with stability in this. So we see this impact, and we see that mackerel are decreasing because whales eat mackerel. That's the reason for that. Now, What we're going to do in this exercise here is to look at maximum sustainable yield. And I encourage you to first explore it by look a bit at the behavior. One aspect of this is that behavior is depending on the vulnerabilities, so the assumptions about carrying capacity. So I go Ecosim, input vulnerabilities, and here I fitted the model previously just fitting for the 3 groups that had time series in them. We have an estimate for seals, that's a very high vulnerability, couldn't get any higher on that. For cod it's much lower, and for whiting it's a higher vulnerability again. It doesn't really matter, you can do this with the default vulnerabilities if that's what you have in your model. I'm just looking here because this helps explain what happens later. So I would like to see what do I have in the model. That's why I go in first and I run it and I check. So what's in the model right now? We often have many scenarios and many time series and things happening, and this is to keep the head straight for what's happening in the model. So what we can do now is we could go and it would be a good idea if you working on this to go in and, because we're going to explore this, reset all the fishing efforts. So I'm in Ecosim, input fishing effort, and in here we can actually see at the lower here that all of the fleets have just same conditions as in Ecopath, same procedure as last year. It's the they already had that, but if there had been time series in here, I would have reset all and gotten these flat lines to see what happens if I try to look for maximum sustainable yield. We could do that by going in and then saying, well, let's try to increase the effort for one of these groups. We can go up here. So now I'm taking bait boats. They are fishing for anchovy, and I'll go in there and I can do something pretty drastic for this group because it's a pretty small fishery. In the tutorial I wrote 30 times, that's a bit much, 10 times would do. No, one thing first. We can go here, run Ecosim, and just make sure we have a run. We have one here, so we have the results. I can go click show multiple plots. How we're going to store this as run 1, and we can compare what happens in different runs. But just to quickly get the results, of course we can get them if we go up here and we take this little floppy disk. If you know what a floppy disk is, it's kind of prehistoric things from age of dinosaurs or something like that. But it's a symbol for how that we can go in and we can set here what we want to save. But for now we can also do that much simpler by going Ecosim results here, Ecosim output, Ecosim results. There's a neat table here that gives you for 2 time periods, a first and a second period. It gives you a summary over 12 time steps, so over 1 year by default. And by default it takes the first year and the last year. So in this case here we're running 41 years, and so it takes for year 0 to 1 and year 40 to 41. So year 0 and year 40. And you have here catches, start, catches, end, and the ratio, value, start, end ratio, cost, start, end ratio. Similar for by species here. We can get the biomass at the end. Control C and Control V doesn't always work, so I right click and say paste, and I can dump it somewhere. In Excel would be quite fine. So we could go in here and paste it. That's not it.
You forgot to copy, Billy.
Oh. Never. Are you saying I made a mistake? Ooh.
You don't make mistakes. It's
no, it's my computer that's misbehaving. Let's try it here. paste. We also need to know what we're pasting. Copy. Copy. You saw it? Copy. Come. And paste. So this here is start, or all fleets at 1. Effort 1. Next thing we're going to try with bait at 10. And we can do that. Back here, fishing effort, and we are on bait boats. Reset it. You can say what you want to set it to. I do it 10 now. Back. Run Ecosim. Ecosim output, run Ecosim, and another one. Now we have 2 runs, and we're seeing quite different. Like we're seeing here, we have 3 runs. Okay, I think we can. Yeah, run 1 and run 2 are the same. So run 3 here, we see seals are going down almost the same. But look at whales. This is whales with little anchovy fishing, and this is whales with lots of anchovy fishing. So they're quite different. And anchovy, I can highlight anchovy here, and now it shows the difference between anchovy and 2. So there is actually some difference here, but it's not that big. The big impact is actually here. Interesting. Oh, whales impact on. See, that's fairly big. Let me just try anchovy again, just to be sure it doesn't mess up.
Yeah, you were showing mackerel and anchovy.
So that's why I wasn't much changed. Oh, 2 anchovy, 3. Okay, that makes more sense. So yeah, we do see this decline, and we see it on anchovy, but we also see it on whales. So I just this is being recorded, so I could have just go back and then delete it, and I would never make a mistake, right, Santiago? So that's basically what it does. And if we can go in here, we can go to results now. And before I just took biomasses. I should actually have copied a couple of things more. Because the value is more interesting. Let me just get a value as well. We definitely need to have that for the first run as well, for it to be set. So I'm just going to reset all, with back to 1.
And rerun.
And rerun it, just to get those numbers that I forgot to copy. We go to Ecosim output, Ecosim results, group, and we want value. We want to copy it, and we want to paste it. Again, this is this here is, oh, that's just to make things complicated. See if I can undo that. That's better, because we're on the same order. So by increasing the fishery for anchovy, I have decreased the biomass of anchovy from 6.9 to 5.9, and the catches, the value of the catch has gone up from 2.9 to 7. So we're getting a much higher catch and a much higher value of the catch. And overall, you can see now the value of the fishery has gone from 19 to 24. So we also see here that it has implication, this increase, for whales, where the biomass is reduced by roughly 20%, It has implications for some of the prey as well. The predators, mackerel is reduced 10%. Whiting will see a substantial reduction because anchovy is a major prey item for anchovy in Anchovy Bay. So we're seeing these spin-off effects. And an interesting aspect of this is, of course, when we're talking about maximum sustainable yield, fisheries research in general is really focused on, or has been focused for 50 years, on maximum sustainable yield on a species by species basis. And there's more and more interest in looking at it at the ecosystem level. And that's what we can contribute to that discussion with well-behaved ecosystem models. Well-behaved in the sense that we understand what they're doing and why they're doing it is an important aspect of being able to communicate that this makes sense, what we see in the model, and that's a component of using it, that the results coming out of it are reasonable, that we can explain them, or that we have an understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. That's what we're looking for. Now there are automated tools for doing what I did here manually, and you can explore this manual part up much more. It's a good learning exercise to figure out how your model is behaving, to take it through this kind of games that I've been playing here. But let's just go back here. I don't need to show multiple runs anymore. And let's now go down to Ecosim, and not input, not output, but the tools down here under Ecosim. There's something called MSY. Fish mortality that gives us MSY should be what it's referring to. And let me try to see if I can manipulate this a little bit. Don't need that big navigator. Actually, I can just hide the navigator for now. So it's hiding over there. So we are in this Ecosim Tools FMSY routine. Now what this routine does is I can just do it. I can go in, and we were interested in anchovy, so that's what we've been talking about. And it's good to figure out what it's doing for one group before doing the full Monty. I'm just going to run it. And whoops, what happened? It disappeared. Yes, for some reason it does that, so you have to go back to the MSY search to find it again. Now, what it does is that it makes a very long run of Ecosim. And it's, I think it's 33 steps. And for each step, does it run 40 years? I think so. So it's probably 1200 years. I think that's how, it's been a while since I looked at this. I think that's how it works. So basically it does a very long run, and then it starts off by whatever is the Ecosim fishing mortality. That's probably right here where things are crossing. That's the start situation. It uses half of these runs to go from that fishing mortality down to 0. So it starts off, let's say, I'm not sure, that the fish mortality is 0.2. So first it makes it runs for 40 years with 0.2, and that's long enough that the various groups will be impacted by that fish mortality. Then it changes that 0.2, let's say, to 0.19, and it does another 40 years, and then 0.18 and all the way down to 0. And then it goes 0.2 and 0.25 and 0.3 or whatever it is, all the way up to a fish mortality of 1. And it's 1 because it's 5 times the 0.2. And the 5 times you can see here maximum relative F up here. So yes, it starts at 0.2 and it goes to 1. So it does this 1000-year run, and it gradually changes it, and it brings it back to equilibrium again, or to equilibrium state, a new equilibrium state. So that's what it does, and then it reads off what impact does change in fish mortality for anchovy have on the rest of the system. And at first, I can tell you I've been confused a few times when I look at this, because I'm expecting, when you think FMSY, you see these nice curves. There are no nice curves here. And that's because over here, data to display, if you go in there, it shows biomass. It doesn't show catch, because these nice curve, maximum sustainable yield, they show catch, not biomass. But let's look at the biomass first. And we're looking first at anchovy, which is this solid green line here. And we can see as we catch more fish harder, the biomass of anchovy decreases almost to zero when we do 5 times increase in fish mortality, and lower it's higher. We also see a line that almost parallels it, not completely, but almost as steep. Now that's for whales, they're being impacted too. And then we have some other groups. That's one that some that are increasing here. One is cod, another would be shrimp. So they are increasing. Well, that's because of an impact on another species. Which, oh, this was anchovy. Sorry, I was too fast there. It's whiting and whales go down the same level. Anchovy doesn't go down nearly as much. Oh, so anchovy is not being, it's whiting. See, that's this green colors here, that's almost the same. It's, if you can see it, Santiago can't tell the difference. He's, of course, colorblind. But the whiting is the one, it's whiting and it's whales that are impacted most by this, more than anchovy. So why isn't anchovy so much impacted? Well, part of the reason is that as you fish them harder, it has a strong impact on their main predators. So it's whales and anchovy are suffering quite a lot from this. And the model takes this into consideration. So it actually, well, it's a food web model, it's an ecosystem model, so that's why it's doing this. And that's also why cod is increasing. That's because whiting would be eating small cod. And when you reduce the anchovy, which is not that important for cod in this model, in Anchovy Bay, then cod actually increases because of it. So that's one thing you can get out of just looking at the biomasses. But we tend to look at catches instead. So this is what you normally see when we're talking about FMSY. And what you see here now, nice and clearly, is that the FMSY for anchovy in the ecosystem model comes in at a fish mortality of 0.7 something. Fairly high. And we can see then the implications of this for the catches of other groups, where we note, for instance, that it leads to higher catches of cod, lower catches of mackerel, and lower catches of whiting. So that's one thing we can see right away. Now, another thing is that may be confusing. Why are there 2 anchovies? That's only one species. You see here, this is anchovy, and this here is also anchovy. And this here, which is called, let's see if I can get it up on the screen. Come on, show me. It says, assessment of anchovy, relative catch, stationary system. This is another estimate of fish mortality for anchovy, but it's based on what we call a stationary system. And in a stationary system, when we run this, we are treating with exactly similar to we're doing basically a single species analysis. So yes, we're running the ecosystem model the same way, but we do not take into consideration the impact that this has on the predator and prey of the group. So it's assuming that predators stay the same, they're not impacted with it. It's assuming that prey, that we don't see that because we fish harder, there are fewer anchovy, and therefore there's more food for the individual anchovy and it will grow better. We don't have that kind of compensation in this single species model that we have here. So the difference here between an FMSY of 0.3 and 1 of 0.7 is whether we have the food web considerations built in, or whether we're considering the food web considerations. That's what makes the difference. And we often find, it's not universal truth, but we often find that the FMSY from the ecosystem perspective is higher than from the single species perspective. So it's not so that when you start thinking about the ecosystem, the immediate reaction is that means we have to fish less. There will be more compensation in a model of this type. That's an interesting and important finding from this. So this is a core aspect of how we use the FMSY. And there is one more button over here called Find FMSYs. That can do what we've just been doing, but it can do it for all of the fish groups in the system. Before I use that one, I'm going to go up to the floppy disk up here. Configure which EwE components can automatically save results to file. So I'm clicking that, and then I'm going in here and say MSY iterations on the autosave is going to have this effect. And run it. And then later on I'm going to go and say, where did I store this information? And you'll see that. So I'm just going to run this now. And again, oh, it disappeared, but you can see in the lower left that something is happening. It's doing anchovy, now it's doing shrimp, and now it's done. Let's go back to the screen. Oh, no, it's running the stationary system for mackerel, for anchovy, for shrimp, and now it's done. So, it's done something. What has it done? That's why we need to go back to anchovy. And we can now see here MSY iterations. Oh, we have something here. We have a folder. I could be funny and just try to explain what a folder is, but I don't think that's necessary after all. Paper hasn't completely disappeared from our world. If I click that one, it would take me to where it would store something. And here there are two files, FMSY full compensation, FMSY stationary system. So we can look at one of these. And we're getting some information here, we're getting some output. One good one to look at is FMSY found. So when it ran for seal, yes, and for all of these ones means yes, it could find an FMSY. And then it gives the value for these. All in one go. The trophic level, base F, anchovy was 0.2, catch at base, and so on, value at base, and yeah. You can get this, and you can get a lot more information out of it. So from here you can see what is the FMSY for these groups. It's estimated to these numbers. You can compare that with the single species in the stationary system, the other CSV file, and explore that. That would be my suggestion.
Billy, quick question.
What does...
Oh yeah, there has to be one. When you go back to Ecosim, there's one that says run to depletion, if I'm not mistaken, that you can tick.
Now, see, what I'm scared about with quick questions is, if it had been a simple question, I would have a chance of answering it. But quick questions tend to take a long time to answer, and they're often the worst cases, the worst ones to deal with. Run to depletion here. Let's try it. Basically, I was just trying to do an anchovy, but it doesn't really work here. But it basically is, you have the option, if you say maximum relative f is f, let's just run it here for anchovy. We need to look at the biomass. So in this case here, anchovy is at 0.3, at 3.5 at the end of it. If I ask it to run to depletion, then it's not going to do 5 times, it's going to do more. It's going to run until it has depleted anchovy. No, it didn't show that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's done in behind, that it will have done more than 5 times. But that's what it's basically, it tries to, what it seeks to do is to extend it so it has the whole shape here, that it gets the whole full shape. We can probably do this for, there must be some of the other species where it's not very clear.
Yeah, the other thing is that when you say 5 on that maximum f, you are actually referring to 5 times the Ecopath baseline f, right?
Yes, that's correct. Here they're very similar also, but that's the idea about it. I have not worried. That's why I say it's not a simple question, because I'm pretty sure that's what it's supposed to do. I just can't tell if it's actually doing that and not plotting it, as we saw for anchovy before. But that's it. Now I think this will do for tutorial 11, which means that next topic for this is back here again.
Tutorial 12, yeah.
Tutorials 12, policy search. There we go. Again, this time we are going to look at trade-offs between economics, social considerations, and ecological considerations. So for this, back to this fantastic place called Anchovy Bay. I'm going to close down a lot of these screens. Start, and we need a navigator again. See if I can make it a bit smaller. Yeah, like that. That should do. So on the navigator here, we are again going to go run Ecosim. we have it loaded. We don't have any time series. Oh, now it auto hides. Fantastic. So we run it. It looks the same. Everything is good. We need to know what we're dealing with, and we are now going to go to the fishing policy search. So we go Ecosim. Make it a little bit clearer here. I'm going to make this actually bigger again, because it auto hides. So we're going to go Ecosim. We now want, oh, I was just going to hide some of these things. Ecopath, Ecosim, and we're going to go down to tools again. And here we have something called fishing policy search, which looks like this. See if we can get it to auto hide again. There we go. And we're getting this complicated interface here. So this is a routine for looking at, to try to find a fishing effort that will optimize our objective function. Sounds simple. It's actually pretty neat. This routine will go out, and it will almost by default go out and then think about how can we optimize for something. And the something we can optimize for is what you see down here in the lower left on the search objective. Net economic value, that's profit. And that's the thing that would pull the ecosystem in one direction. That's going to be lower the effort and make those who are fishing make more money. That's one aspect of having lower effort. Social value employment is one that's going to go in an opposite direction. It's going to see how much fish can we extract, how much value rather than fish can we extract for this ecosystem, based on the assumption that more value means more jobs. The third one is something called mandate rebuilding. That can be used to bring a species back to, if you have a minimum biological level, then you may need to get the fisheries back to that level before you allow fishing on them. And it can also be used the other way around. If they are above that level, you can put a big penalty on if they go below it. Then they are, if you fish them too hard, the fisheries are really not going to be allowed to do that. So you can use that if we have a minimum biological acceptable level, MBAL. You can say, oh, we want the fisheries to stay above this threshold. Then there's ecosystem structure, which relates to one of EP Odom's measures about longevity. It seeks to optimize for long-lived species. And the final one, there's biodiversity, which we don't have a good measure on by default in an Ecopath model. We have a number of functional groups, and what this is going to do then is to try to balance it so that we get evenness across the spectrum of functional groups. So we don't get in a situation where a few groups really dominate and the rest do not. If we can move in a direction of being more even across the number of functional groups, more even biomass across the number of functional groups, that's what's preferred. We parameterize these various variables. For net economic value, it's just putting a weight here. That's straightforward to calculate. We calculate the revenue and the cost, and net economic value is just fisheries revenue minus fisheries cost. Straightforward. For social value, the assumption there, default assumption is that if you land for $1,000, you have the same number of jobs in the various components. But it may well be that certain boats have much fewer jobs than other boat types. So you can look after, you can take care of this here. For instance, that occupation is much higher on artisanal fleets than on industrial fleets, as one example. Maybe the shrimp trawlers, they have a high value, but relatively few jobs. They don't need that many boats on those trawlers compared to some of the other boats. So you can have that kind entering into it. For mandate rebuilding, there's no default there. You have to put something in, which is the relative biomass relative to Ecopath, as far as I remember. And then structure relative weight here. For whales it's 20, for seals it's 6.4. This is the inverse longevity, the average, the inverse PB. So the average longevity in this model here, in this entry bay, the average whale lived for 20 years, the average seal for 6.4 years, the average cod for 3.2, the average whiting. So we're taking these here and we multiplying them with biomass. The structure relative weight, multiply that with the biomass of each group, and that gives us a number of biomass years. Biomass times years, right? So we're trying to maximize that. So whales are really important for this, and seals are important, whereas when we get further down, you see we put 0 for zooplankton. If there's less than, I can't remember what it is, but if you see benthos is included, but not those really quick turnovers, they don't contribute very much to longevity, so we just cut them off. But you can change these values. Not that I've seen anyone do that, because it's actually pretty reasonable. But that's an interesting one too. There's one constraint here, maximum fishing mortality. You can avoid fishing mortalities going too high by saying, well, the most we can allow for cod would be a fish mortality of 0.5, and it would not go over that. So that's how it works with the objective function. Now, just to run it. The other things we have here is number of runs. I'll skip the discounting rates, that's different, you can read about that. Number of runs is, if you put there, like we can put 2. How many variations there are, doesn't matter too much. Base year is basically our economic information. What year does that pertain to? Is that the first year, or could also be that it was year 30? And that's when we have the economic information for, so that's really where the profit and cost has to be based on what happens in year 30. And if that was the case, we would probably do like this. We would, let's say year 10 instead. So I don't have to go. I click, and now wait. Okay, it took a little while. I click the black up here, and I click the numbers from 1 to 10, and then it puts black there. That means use whatever is in the Ecopath. Don't change it. So you could, for instance, be fitting your model to a time series of 30 or 40 years, and then when you run this routine here, you start in year 42, and then you move 20 years forwards, and you look at optimization moving into the future. It won't change anything in those black years here. I'm going to go back and reset it here. What you can figure out from this is also what a color means. By default, right now we have 6 colors up here, and a color means find me a fishing effort. Just like in the time series fitting, a color means find, in there it meant find me a vulnerability. Now here color means find me a time series. And we could change that numbers. We could have many more. We could, for instance, decide, oh, I would like for sealers, I would like to have a rebuilding of it for some years, and then another thing happening later on. That would all be fine to do. I'm going to go back again to the default here. So that's the colors. So number of blocks and which one you selected is just because if you have a lot, you may not be able to see which one it is. Not so important. How much effort we want to change. We continue down here, initializing using, and this is really important. Use random Fs. The default when you get in here is Ecopath base F, and then they always start at 1 and they move away from there, from that effort actually. Random is much better to use, random effort, start from that. That means we're starting at different places, and this routine is going to go out and try to map the space for what happens when it changes, in this case here, these 5 different efforts, how that impacts the objective function. So it's a pretty difficult, it's like being sent out here up in the North Mountains with blindfolded with a stick, long stick, and having to find the biggest mountain. You may be stuck on a mountain top somewhere and you can't reach over to the real biggest mountains. You may be stuck in what's called a local minima. You can also call it a local maxima, but in principle that's the same. So you may get stuck on these local minima. The routine is pretty good at that, and the best way of figuring out if it's doing it is actually that when you do the search that you start from random F and then run it. And in this case here, we can check for that, how it does that, and that's always a good idea to do. See if I can give myself more space down here. So set it up to run two runs, and what it's doing now is it's calculating the profit. It's calculating all of these measures here, but it's using the plus that you can see the total and the economic. The total is what our objective function says, and that's 1 times this value and 0 times this value, 0 times this value, 0 times this value, 0 times that value, because that's how we define the objective, if I can see that. See, I put it 1 there. We're optimizing for profit. This is what the traditional economists say, that's how we should be managing fisheries, to optimize for the individual, for the fleet profit, making them efficient and so on and so on. Anyway, so it's trying to do that now, and what it's saying is fish less for sealers, Trawlers is kind of okay, and it's actually not going very far with this. Lower effort generally, maybe a bit more fishing on trawlers now. So it's working its way and it's trying to map the landscape, but it's not getting very far with this. Actually, you can see total over here is 0.99, and where did we start? We started 0.65 because we were starting at random values. It takes a little while, but especially if you have many more colors up on the top screen, but it doesn't take forever to do this. Though we do have to do it twice or several times. I only want to show you once here that this one case. Now, Santiago, if we had been if we had actually done this in class as we're supposed to do, we could have taken questions now.
Yeah. So a typical one is, how do you decide how much weight do you assign to a particular objective function?
That's I was just about to say, thank you. That's a simple question, which means it's one of those questions I can actually give an answer to. The answer is there's no correct way of doing it. That's not a good answer, is it? Now, what we've done here is the first thing is we're scaling everything to the Ecopath baseline. So it's not the actual value that matters. It's not profit in dollars. It's not how many jobs there are. It's how many are there relative to the baseline. That's what we're trying to maximize. So it's scaled to the baseline. So they all start with 1, or they would all start with 1 if the effort was 1. Actually, you can see now, oh, they're increasing. They decided now to go after the seals. If you look down there, and they're also going after the baits. They're going to fish more anchovy and more seals. Interesting. So we scale it relative to that baseline, and that actually helps get everything on the same scale. You would say it's all starting from 1. But one issue is it's easier to get higher profit than it may be to get more biodiversity. Because they don't move the same way. Profit is fairly easy. You just cut back on effort generally, and you would be making more, the individual boats would be making more money. But yeah, so there's a difference there, and the only way you can do that is to try to map the space. You have to look at this. You have to see what it's doing. And one important aspect of that is when you're done with a run, the efforts that you see now on the like the effort that you see up there, oh, it's still running. They would be in Ecosim, so they're transferred to Ecosim. So you can go in and you can run Ecosim and you can see how this new universe with these new fishing effort, how that looks. You don't have to just look at you shouldn't just look at these numbers and say, yeah, that's nice, I got some results now, I'm going to use those results. You ought to go back there and explore what do they actually mean, and do that make sense. Now, one issue with this related is that this actually when we had this first developed, I thought it was really fantastic we could do this, and it is pretty neat that we can contribute to that discussion about where do we want ecosystems to move. The problem with this is that we will never get policymakers to define an objective function. Because if they do that, they risk that, basically, what is it? Robbing Peter to pay Paul, that syndrome, that there are trade-offs between the fleets, and a policymaker does not want to be seen favoring some people at the cost of others. Even if from a social perspective it makes a lot of sense, it's a dangerous discussion to go into. But one way you can use this efficiently is to let this tell you something about how far can you go. So in this case here, what we've been analyzing, I hope we're done, it's still going, my, incredible. Okay, it's done with the first one. Now we can get an idea of what happens here in the first. This is just how much it changed, not that much over time. Back to iteration. It's starting again, and now it's starting from a different perspective. The first run, it ended up with having higher, so that's once down the bottom here, it's ended up with higher fishing for seals, for the trawlers, and specifically for the bait boats. And it was able to get a 1.06 or 6% increase compared to the baseline in profit. That was actually not very much. Now it's trying again. Now back to using this. One really interesting aspect of this is that you can use it to see if we are optimizing for profit, how far can we go? So you can construct an amoeba that has arms going out, and in that one you can say for profit, this here is our base situation, and this is how far it can go if we optimize for profit. And similar, one here for economic value or social value, that would be our baseline Ecopath model, and one, whatever it might, let's say 2 would be the most jobs, or 5 would be the most jobs you can get. So you can map the space with these 5. 4 actually, mandate rebuilding is not easy, that one is a little bit different, but the other 4 you can map them in amoeba, and then you can look at various scenarios for management and where they fit in. So that way, if you do it one by one, you are not getting into this question of finding something that is more benefiting all, that's maybe an optimal solution, because even if it is overall, even if you can go out and you can find a solution that has higher profit, more jobs, better ecosystem structure, more longevity, long-lived resilient species, and a good portfolio that's really diverse, even if you can point that out, there will still be trade-offs in it, and those trade-offs may be very unpopular for a manager or a policymaker. So, yeah.
No, I didn't mean to cut you. I was just gonna. Please finish.
Okay. Good. So we are running now the second time here, and we're seeing something very similar. So we're seeing it's still running, but we're seeing sealers increase in trawlers, decrease in seiners, big increase in bait boats, and almost steady for shrimpers. So it's it's on the way to the same
Location.
The same location, yeah. So I'm going to stop it.
So, Billy, just
yeah.
sorry, just
Go ahead.
to synthesize what you were referring to. So you suggested when we're trying this out, we should look at the different objectives independently, and then map the trade-offs in using amoeba or radar plots, instead of like surveying, for example, stakeholders and saying like, what would you prefer? And they'll say like, okay, so if let's say I'm a fishing company, and like I would like to maximize my profit. I don't really care about like diversity, but like maybe I would give like half the weight of the economy to the jobs. And then you ask, and you run that scenario. So do you think that's less feasible, or like it's going to be harder to explain and hard to get to that point than just
I would say,
running everything? Yeah.
you can easily do this optimization at the ecosystem level using an approach like this. The question is just whether what comes out of it is any more than an academic exercise. Of course, you can use this if you use this at the country level. You may be able to sway some policymakers and say, we are in this situation now, and there are ways of getting us to a much better situation. it really depends on who you can get in contact with to discuss this. The options are there. Maybe what I'm saying, if I rephrase it, is it may be very difficult to get any policymakers or managers to take these for face value and to say that, oh, I have an optimal solution and this is what you should do. It doesn't work like that. But this can be used to explore the options there are. And that includes having this amoeba that says, how far can we go in that direction? So when you have something that is a more balanced solution, where you don't mess up the ecosystem, for instance, you can still show that on the map what the consequences are. Yes, there is going to be a small cost in number of jobs, but at the ecosystem level or at the country level, we are talking about 5% difference or 10% difference from what it could have been. And if you compare that to the present situation, then we are talking about that big difference. So there are these, there are clearly those. This allows us to be in the room where it happens, to contribute to that room. That's to what happens in that room. That's what I think is an important aspect of this. And as such, the routine is really, really underutilized, considering that these are important considerations for introducing of ecosystem-based fisheries management right now. Can also contribute to ecosystem-based management, multi-sectoral, because there are more and more happening now on that, but that's a different topic. If we could just, while we just here go and change the objectives, and I'm still going to do just one. Don't want to continue much further than this. We talked enough. Just running it now. Now it's optimizing for social values. You can see that down here in the calls that the total objective function has a value of 1.07, and that corresponds to the social value. So now we're optimizing for jobs. And where can we find those jobs? It started off with random values. So based on that, it got to that. And you can see there after the first time it made the change, it brought it got a negative value over here. Oh, sorry, economic value is negative. Yeah. It's losing money now, of course. It's losing money because it's increasing the number of jobs. And there is no constraint on it here. We haven't invoked the constraint up here saying prevent cost bigger than earnings. So we can also, in this situation here, we could, for instance, have certain fleets being subsidized by other fleets if the overall contribution is positive. As in this case here, says, oh, we can double the number of jobs. We may get way too high effort, but we may go out and subsidize that if that's what we want. We are getting bigger landings, so we're fishing much harder with trawlers, much harder with seiners. Interestingly, our bait boats doesn't seem to be moving that fast up, but also harder with the shrimpers. And that has to do with a bit of value, quite a bit of value there. So even though the catches are not that big, they still have value. They translate into jobs. So yeah, economic value, minus 16. They're going way down. We're losing a lot of money compared to what we did there. But again, we're into some extremes here.
This is full overcapacity now.
Yeah. So trawlers, again, this is with no bounds. There's no maximum fish mortality. What we could sensibly have done here would be for mandate rebuilding, saying, well, we won't allow biomasses of groups to go below a certain level, and it would stop these wild increases. So you could put those additional factors in to avoid it being ridiculous, what comes out of it. And if you it being nonsensical is you check for that. You figure out what goes on in that model. You can, let's just stop this and go and see. Stop, run Ecosim, run. You notice now.
You forgot to click the multiple runs.
No, it's okay. What you can see now is nothing happens the first year because we're keeping, well, only biomass accumulation terms are impacting the first year. And then we kick in with these wild efforts. And you can see here we're losing cod, we're losing whiting, we're losing mackerel, seals are going down, we have lots of anchovy, and we have benthos. So go here on data to plot, value absolute, and run it again. So we have 40 times value here. We started at 20, cumulative value of 20. We increased that to 40, and we done that by fishing for shrimp, and so shrimp and anchovy. That's how we changed the system with this. Yeah, we could compare this to input, Ecosim input, fishing effort, reset all, run Ecosim, run. See, now we have the 20. It's still dominated by shrimp and anchovy, and we have these other things too. But we were able to get from 20 to extract for 40 a value of 40 from this, so double the value. But the cost of this enormous fishing makes it absolutely uneconomical. But you can balance that in the fishing policy search by saying the highest here on objectives. That, for instance, the highest fishing you will allow for cod would be not 1,000 fish mortality, but 0.5 or how far it's allowed to go. So you can put bounds on these, and then do that, you get more sensible output. I think it's reasonable that it's extreme output, but there can be these clauses saying we don't want to see species going below a certain level, and you can also do that with mandate rebuilding, of course. So you have two handles here for how to do that.
Billy,
and
the prevent costs and earning being larger than earnings, then you are limiting your policy search to a space where nothing can lose money in regard to the Ecopath baseline.
In
or
principle,
no
yes.
fleet. Yeah, okay.
But it doesn't. It's not always possible for it to find it. Let's see if we can do it now. See, it drew some random numbers now, and it's oh yeah, no, it actually moved over to an economic value that is above zero, which is what we're looking for down there. Which stays above zero now, and the social value is still. I don't know what the baseline is here, but it's still pretty high.
We're still optimizing for jobs. Yeah.
We're still optimizing for that, yeah. But now it should try to avoid losing money. It's not completely doing it. It is a bit tricky to get this to work properly. You see, it's building a social value, but it is actually losing a bit of money. But the outcome, as you can see over here, is not nearly as negative as it is.
Yeah.
Basically, right now it's probably stuck out there on that with that long stick on the mountain. It has difficulties finding its way out of it again, which basically calls for reducing. It should start reducing some of these efforts here, but it's still building it up because it's a little bit greedy. So yeah, it's still going the wrong direction.
It's nothing as big as 17 times the trawler's efforts, right?
Yeah.
So.
But then you combine this with some F values, and it should be possible. But it is a bit tricky to get this perfectly correct. Okay, I think we covered the basics of this. If you combine this with going through the tutorials on your own, you should be able to get a reasonably good handle on how to use it. The various things are explained in there and in the user guide for EwEs. So let me end here by encouraging you to do that. Yeah, have fun. Bye-bye.